We have a couple of things on today's agenda, and please chime in toward the end of the meeting if you have anything you'd like to add. As many of you know, my name's Austin Mullinex. I work at Mesa County Libraries. It was nice seeing a lot of you at MUG last week. And Brandon, just want to thank you and Marmot for putting that on. I think that was a really nice conference. Thank you.
Thank you for everyone who attended, and thank you for providing your facilities.
Yeah, absolutely. Great conference. And had some really great sessions. I think you guys put everything on really nicely, as always. But we'll go ahead and get started. The first order of business, if you will, would be something along the lines of patron place holds with pickup locations across agencies. This came about because I was communicating with the library at CMU, Colorado Mesa University in Grand Junction. We had encountered a pretty minor issue where a patron had a couple items that showed a pickup location of our central library, but it was for a CMU library account. So I contacted the CMU library, and we found out that apparently this is something that that can be done from time to time. This is pretty new to me because I work at a public library and haven't seen that before. But I guess I just wanted to start by just asking, has anybody else come across this? And if so, has it created any confusion or problems?
Austin, this is Anna. So the hold was on their Colorado Mesa card. They didn't have a card with Mesa County, or did they have a card with both? I'm just trying to.
No, good question. I'm not sure if the patron even actually ever came in to pick it up. We just noticed when we went to generate the hold, but it was one of our items for the CMU patron's library account.
Okay, so and then the pickup was at your library, not at the CMU library, huh?
Exactly, and we hadn't seen that before, so we were just a little confused. And once I reached out to CMU, they had mentioned, yeah, this is an option from time to time. It doesn't come up very often, and that individual encouraged me to consider bringing this up during this meeting.
I can talk a little bit about it, kind of what we do on the Marmot side to try and avoid it as much as possible. So in PICA, PICA uses the patron's home library to only show possible pickup locations for that library or library system. So if a patron had a home library of Mesa County, like one of the Mesa County libraries in Sierra, PICA will see that and only feed up any of the Mesa County libraries as a possible pickup location. That works in the opac.marmot.org too, correct?
I can't remember what OPAC does. Because OPAC is generic, the whole union catalog, and theoretically patrons would not use it, but patrons do use it. So. Yeah,
so that may be how patrons are slipping in. Also, anything that's placed in Sierra obviously does not have that kind of bypass put in place because it's staff who should be filling the holds or placing the holds if they're done through Sierra. So Sierra would be considered kind of like a super user essentially, where staff could choose potentially a different pickup location if they were not trained correctly.
So, and I just did log into opac.marmot.org, and after I authenticated, it did only give me Mesa County pickup branches. So
yeah, so right now, as far as PICA is concerned, it should only be feeding up pickup locations as long as the patron's home library is correct. If the patron's home library is, if it's something like a library an item shelf location versus an actual home library, then PICA may not be picking those up all the time, but Sierra will still allow the checkout. So, for instance, if you had a Mesa County patron with, let's say they're a Clifton patron, but they had like the home library of an adult fiction book instead of just Mesa County Clifton. And that can happen if someone accidentally typos the item or staff are not trained to understand that Mesa County Juvenile is not for juvenile patrons. It's probably for juvenile materials. They all occupy the same table, location codes and library shelf codes. So PICA may not pick up on those and provide the correct pickup locations in those cases. So just making sure that you're choosing the correct home library code, and then training staff to always know that if they're placing the hold through Sierra, to choose the correct pickup location based on the patron's home library.
Brandon, thanks, and Jimmy, thank you guys for mentioning that. It doesn't sound like it's that common or widespread. Do you guys ever hear you guys ever have any like help tickets or calls or confusion or problems about it?
Not very often. It may happen from time to time. I would say less than 2 or 3 times a year is how often I've seen it. It used to happen a little bit more before we had the locations all separated and everything out correctly, but nowadays it doesn't happen hardly at all.
Okay.
Would it be worth scanning the patron files to make sure there's a match between agency, home library, barcode prefix? I mean, there's a few things that really all should be pertaining to the right library, and it would be very easy for anybody at the cert desk to get 1 out of 3 wrong, and then this would come up.
Yeah, I mean, we could certainly take a look and see, make sure that everyone knows, and maybe provide a list of the actual home library location codes. I think we put them on the website, but they're separated out per library. So making sure that that's part of the staff training, that they see those location codes and know, if your patron has this home library location, this is what they need to actually receive their holds correctly.
Jimmy, Brandon, thank you. I saw a comment from Anna mentioned that she hasn't seen it, but she's curious about a new school and public library partnership that's forming, and she's wondering if that might be more common.
So with the school partnerships that we've been setting up, the one with Eagle and Vail, those students come in, they're automatically loaded. So they're not added to the system the same way a public library patron would be. They're loaded from the school system, and what we do with those is we automatically apply a home library code of like Eagle schools. And what that does is it makes it to where their whole pickup locations in Sierra, in PICA, are only an Eagle library or a Vail public library.
And you're populating the agency code, and because it's automatic, there's not much room for
error on those. The Garfield ones are a little bit different because they're added on the go to the Sierra system, but they're added the same way like regular patrons are. If the student has a public library card, then it's just giving them a second option to choose a different pickup location. So there is potential there, but with them, the only pickup location they see, if they're one of those students, is one of the Garfield libraries or that school library that they could potentially pick up the item at as well. So I don't think that those are causing any issues.
Okay. Brandon, thanks for mentioning that. Does anybody have any questions about this, or is anyone noticing any problems with regard to that system? Brandon, Anna says thanks for the explanation.
Yeah, so we'll look into that a little bit on our end and make sure that everything in the home library and the agency tables are clear and configured, and make sure that PICA is updated with that information as well.
Thank you. Moving on, we have 2 more items today. One is I had to ask Brandon just to talk a little bit about some of the some Sierra and Pica issues lately. Brandon, thanks for being willing to discuss that. I'll turn it over to you if you're ready.
You bet. So I've kind of broken it up, and I'll talk about it in, actually, let me just show my screen here because that's going to be a little bit easier. And I'm going to share my program here that I take notes on. Over here on the side, I've got the ASC meeting. So talking about Sierra and Pica crashes and slowness. Starting off with just some of the causes. Let me just minimize this guy here. Starting off with some of the causes. So as you may know, we worked on getting Sierra virtualized this year. That actually occurred on Martin Luther King Day is when the actual Sierra virtualization for Marmot occurred. So with that, we had a little bit of downtime that day. We figured out, since this is a new process for us, that the way Sierra works is it's two servers, and when it's virtualized, it's two virtual servers. The benefit. Hey,
Brandon?
Yeah, sorry, what?
We can't actually see what you're sharing. We just see a white band.
Oh, okay.
There we go.
That better? Okay. So I'm working on this section here. So with that virtualization, the benefits that occur are that we can easily move a server from its current location into another virtual server. We can, on the go, adjust resources such as storage, memory, and that sort of thing. So virtualization really has been a great way to go with running Sierra. But we found out with one of the moves that we did that the way Sierra and Sierra DB and Sierra application are connected is that it doesn't make it in the way we had it configured. It didn't make it easy to move the servers on the go. So like whenever we do updates or anything like that. So what happened was we moved Sierra application first, and that broke the connection with the database. So what we've done to fix that was JB worked with III, since all of their server hosting is virtual as well. So we worked with them to kind of figure out how they do their moves, and we updated some configuration files within Sierra DB and Sierra applications where that connection can be maintained during the move. So whenever we do have to move those servers around, you shouldn't notice any outages or downtime. So that's what we've done to fix that. So the DB move should be a lot more seamless for you guys.
As of when?
That was just shortly after that first move where the connection broke. So JB got that fixed.
From March maybe into April, but
yeah.
Since then this is not a cause of
not an issue.
Slowdowns or breakdowns.
Correct, yeah. Okay. As far as we, let's see, I guess when was that hardware crash? I think it was in early September. We had on our one of our virtual servers, and it just happened to be the one that Sierra sat on, we had a major hardware failure. And that hardware failure made it to where essentially whenever you do a virtual server move, the actual live version has to be up and running in order for it to not cause a downtime. But since we had that hardware failure, it basically made it to where we could still move Sierra just fine, but we couldn't have it up and running because of the hardware failure that had occurred on the live machine. So moving both Sierra and Sierra DB while that hardware failure occurred caused some downtime there. The good thing about the way we have Sierra virtualized is that if we hadn't have virtualized Sierra and we had that hardware failure happen without virtualization, we would have been without Sierra for a few days, possibly weeks, as opposed to a few hours. So that was a benefit there. We didn't have to get a new full server into the office and get everything set up. We didn't have to go through and perform any emergency virtualizations or anything like that. So that was one benefit to that. There really isn't a great way to prevent hardware failures, but we are in a better place than we were previously to move those systems with as much minimal downtime as possible. So that's one of the crashes that occurred within early September, I believe. Moving on to some of the Pica issues. After our last Sierra upgrade, we were running a way through Sierra to get an export into Pica, and it was actually something that III had set up for us. We can't use the export in the same way that some smaller libraries can, in that we have such a large database of bibs that we cannot use the traditional means to actually get the records out of Sierra and into Pica. So Sierra runs an alternative export through, basically it's the text-based system, and III set that up for us when we moved to Sierra. I think we had it in Millennium as well before we upgraded. So with that upgrade to Sierra, we saw that alternative means was not actually including due date information in the bib records. So the way we were getting data was that for each of the bib records, it showed all of the item information in the 949 field, and it had been including due date information, so it was just fine. But after that upgrade, we weren't seeing the due date information anymore. So we immediately opened up a ticket with III and said, hey, the system you have in place for us is not including due dates anymore. So they immediately confirmed and put it into place as a bug report and moved it into their development team to get that fixed. However, we ended up finding out later on that it wasn't as priority of an issue for them as some other bugs that they were working on. We were really one of the only sites using that alternative export. So what we ended up doing, actually, Mark from R&D actually developed a different export that uses Sierra DNA, so we can actually get those due dates and all that information into Pica. So that took a few days to develop. By the time we figured out that III wasn't going to be able to make the fix in, even within a couple months. So we got that all set up, and that's in place now. We are prepared for future upgrades to make sure that that's going to continue working, since it's using the Sierra DNA versus using a specialized export. We shouldn't have any issues with those due dates not appearing. And so we're good there as far as that goes. Moving on to potential cause of slowness lately. We have been going through we got the authority records back from Archive, and we started loading those. And with those, they were in batches of 50,000 records. So we would load those 2 to 3 at a time. When we started getting reports of the slowness, we narrowed it down to 1 or 2 at a time. And we finally finished that authority record load a couple weeks ago. So the slowness in Sierra that was being caused by that authority record load shouldn't be occurring anymore. This was really the volume that we had to do is really a one-time thing, because we were having to reload all of the authority records and all of the bibs for our entire database. Going forward, we're only going to be loading updates and new records. So anything new that's cataloged and any updates for authority records that Marchive adds in, we'll be adding that information in. But we plan on running those overnight, and we've got a process in place to make those occur to where we can load those overnight. So those quarterly updates really shouldn't cause any issues for you guys as far as slowness or anything like that goes. So that goes over both causes and prevention steps. Any questions or anything else that you guys think I might be missing? We'll chat here real quick.
So the point of this report is to acknowledge that people have seen slowdowns and problems, and the things that we've identified that we have addressed, we feel some confidence that we're not going to have these same problems again. We know how to address them if we see things like this.
Yep.
There's nothing worse than standing in front of a patron saying, I'm sorry, the system's slow or it's down or whatever. That's agonizing. Mm-hmm. But just for you all to reassure your colleagues that a few events this past few months have been either one time or situations that were special, but we feel that they're under control, so you don't have to feel like, oh no, what's coming next, based on a track record of more than an unusual number of situations like this past few months. Also, by the way, when we told III they broke the export on us, I negotiated another pain and suffering discount, so we actually squeezed some money out of III because we had to develop a workaround because their product was broken, and it's not a big consolation prize, but I'm glad to say that III acknowledged what a big inconvenience this was for us, for Pike and I have these days.
Yeah, absolutely. So any other slowness or anything like that that's occurring in Sierra now, we don't really know a cause for. So if you are still experiencing slowness or crashes, just give us a call on the help desk. If you're an IT member, we can log into your one of your computers and kind of try and deduce what's happening at that time and see if we can figure out if there's any network cause or anything like that. If you're a non-IT member, go ahead and give us a call. Let us know that Sierra is acting a little slow. We can try and figure out if there's anything on Sierra that might be causing any issues. Yeah, and that sort of thing. There's a few things within Sierra. If it's acting a little weird or whatever, we can call up III and say, hey, can you restart these services or whatever? And usually that fixes any issues that occur out of the blue, so to speak.
And Anna, the savings does not get passed on to members, but it more than covers the bar bill at Mug. And probably the caterer too.
Yeah, and Mark's spare work that he had to do.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was the intent of it. It was paying Marmot to develop, but it's not that, like a couple $1,000. It wasn't enough to actually pass out.
Yeah.
Brandon, do we know if there's sort of a record set size at which loading it causes Sierra to be slower?
We've noticed with records ranging roughly 0 to about 40,000 usually cause really many issues. But definitely like those lower, smaller loads. We load patron files, and those are usually in the couple of thousands, and those usually don't cause any issues.
I'm just wondering if there should be a conversation with like the UCC committee about reminder if you're loading a lot of records, think about when to load them.
It definitely doesn't hurt. I know that something that I've talked about with Lloyd is if we are doing any large loads or anything like that, to reach out to a couple of the email lists and say, hey, is anyone else doing a large load right now? That way we know whether or not we're going to be causing any issues, because it doesn't necessarily need to be just, one large load. It could be a bunch of smaller loads that just add up and cause some of the resource drain on the system because it's focusing on doing those loads. So
yeah, because it's not unreasonable that some of the academics might be loading more than 40,000 records at a go.
Yeah, for sure. And if we don't know about it, we don't have a great way to track. So what we usually try to do, if we see any slowness or anything, or we get reports of slowness occurring, our first step is to obviously call AAA and say, hey, do you see anything on the system? And they can see the loads happening, and they can say, hey, there's a large load or whatever. But I think what our plan going forward is to maybe shoot on an email to one of the listservs and say, hey, or not listservs, but one of the committee email lists and say, hey, UCC, ASC, does anyone know, is anyone doing a large load that could be happening? But yeah, that might be something worth talking about with UCC and saying, okay, at what point do we say, hey, this load might be a little too large, maybe I should try and have Marmot run it overnight or something like that. Because we definitely have that ability. We can use Scheduler to if it's a regular load, we can use Scheduler to process those loads overnight. If it's something less regular, like a one-time thing, we can just go ahead and run those loads manually if they're a little bit on the larger side. But yeah, I don't think it would hurt to pass that along to UCC, and I'll mention that to Lloyd as well, that maybe we need to look at some sort of way to track down some of these larger loads and make sure that those are occurring at a more convenient hour.
Jimmy, Brandon, just want to thank you for bringing that up and being willing to discuss that topic. So, it's nice to know kind of what's going on, and it's nice to be able to tell some of our patrons things sometimes, when they're, curious about what might be causing some delays or problems. So, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And unless anyone else has any questions or anything related to that topic, the last thing we have on our agenda is Brandon was going to be discussing a little bit more about the prospector reconciliation document.
Prospector reconciliation document as far as what prospector sends out?
Yeah, we were, I had that on for sort of old topics to discuss again. Because I can't remember if the last ASC meeting we had, I think we kind of left off on that a little bit, but maybe I'm mistaken. Does anybody have any questions about that? Did we all get what we needed in terms of the information for that?
I think there was some conversation about the courier loss there was maybe going to be, in addition to each library sort of trying to figure their loss, there was perhaps going to be sort of a concerted group effort to stress that with the courier service from Marmot. Am I remembering that correctly?
Hi, Anna. Yes, thanks for mentioning that. I do believe that's where we kind of left off is we were talking about putting a list together. I think namely DVDs kind of being lost in transit was a big topic of that conversation. Does that sound?
Yeah, that's right. I know we have, I think about to the tune of about $6,000 worth that we're waiting to hear about.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. And then I think, Brandon, correct me if I'm wrong, but were you working on a list, like a list for those items?
Yeah, so I'm working on getting a report put together that is using Tableau to actually put that information out onto maybe the website, maybe just sending it out to you guys on ASC, and it would provide a listing of all of the items that were gone through Prospector that were like in transit too long. And I'm still working on putting that together, but that would cover everyone versus just individual libraries having to run the report.
Brandon, thank you for working on that. And you'll let us know when it's ready?
Yeah. In the meantime, continue to do whatever report you're running currently. But yeah, I'm working on the backlog for Tableau this month, and I should get a lot of the stuff that's in that backlog taken care of. So hopefully by the next ASC meeting, I'll have something to show you guys.
Brandon, thank you.
Brandon, you said prospector a couple of times, but the prospector reconciliation reports are distributed by the prospector committee. What you're working on is the Marmot equivalent of the prospector reconciliations, right, for the Marmot Whitehall?
Well, what we're actually looking at is it's not something that prospector sends out, supposedly. It's like an in-transit tooling so that they can actually send out like the claim to the courier to say, hey, these are missing. So it's not necessarily prospector, I guess. It's stuff that's disappearing in the courier.
Regardless of
Marmot
or
prospector.
Okay.
Correct.
And Jimmy, I think this came up under prospector last time because there was some discussion about the sort of in-process reconciliation that's going on that this year is kind of several months behind schedule. And so there were some questions about that when it was on the agenda last time. And then we sort of moved into talking about, oh, by the way, the courier seems to have lost a lot of DVDs.
Yeah, so we're going to create a report to kind of find some of those maybe that have been like in transit too long or something like that.
And does everybody report this to the CLIC office? Because when we do the reconciliation to find things that got filed in my library that belong to you. That's like one main purpose of that. But even after we've done our looking for the things that it might still be in our libraries, we haven't done anything to organize all the Marmot complaints to the CLIC office in one go. I assume that you all are calling CLIC directly when you have reason to believe it's the courier that's at fault. Yeah? Do you?
This is Amy from CMC Quigley, if you can hear me. And I've reported all of our lost items directly through the CLIC website, courier website, where they have that ability to report those directly with the dates and the locations where they were supposed to be. Unfortunately, I've not heard anything back from these, nor has our director.
Yeah, hi. So I think it's important for us to keep doing that. Just through the mechanism that CLIC's put up, we can reinforce it from the Marmot office, but ultimately for them to hear the reports from you individually, for one thing, might help them focus in on a particular driver or a particular route and put together clues that come from all the libraries. So even though it's tempting to say, here's the Marmot report of all the problems that our members, I suspect it's better for you as individual libraries to report using that mechanism that CLIC has posted. And if they get swamped from a few directions, well, that's...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the report that I would make it to where members wouldn't have to run a report to actually get the information. They could just look at it and then report it through the CLIC Courier website in a bulk list of the things that showed those criteria. So not necessarily something that we would report directly, but because I think it's good to have that rather than one Marmot sending out the information, being able to say, okay, we're getting 27 different people saying these are the bunch of items that we're missing, rather than one person saying these are the items across the whole system that are missing. It just, I think it maybe causes a little bit more stress. Maybe some more action on that end.
So when you go to post the report that you're talking about in Tableau, you should let's put a footnote on that page, something about this report. It helps libraries look for missing materials that can be found in each other's libraries. But if you have any reason to believe the courier is at fault, here's a link to the page and click to report courier problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I could put something like that.
Just to help steer people toward that reporting mechanism.
Yeah. We have sent ours in and followed up with CLIC directly. Okay, yeah.
Brandon, thank you for organizing that. I think that's going to be really helpful. I've just in the process of running view outstanding hold reports. I'm seeing a lot of that too. And just want to speak to your question earlier. Yeah, we have an in-transit list that we run in Mesa County. And based on that in-transit list, if we don't find items that have been in transit for usually about 2 weeks or longer, we do form twice. If we can't find them after that second time, we're initiating a click report for the individual item. But I like your idea. I think that's going to be really helpful to have one unified document. Well, is there any other topics that anybody would like to discuss? Okay, if there's nothing further to go over today, our next meeting will be on Tuesday, November 14th. I hope to see many of you at Cal, and I hope you all have a nice month ahead. Thanks, everyone.